say yes in the chat box. You can hear my voice, see the screen, say yes in the chat box. Cool. Okay, great. You guys ready for another exciting day of PMP information? Cool. Great. Excellent. All right. Let's jump into it then. As I've stated before, hopefully you've been jumping in the LMS, the Learning Management System, taking advantage of that. That is part of the class. And you've started to memorize A61, which is the framework. And you started to memorize the formulas because that could take you like a little while as well to memorize. And you've made copies of the menus in the beginning of each of the knowledge areas. You don't need to memorize those per se, but you do need to be familiar with them. So I encourage you, you haven't done so, to go ahead and do that, okay? So today, which is day 11, we're going to be talking about communications management. Really difficult knowledge area is not one that most students tend to struggle on. Soft skills, one of those knowledge areas that you know, okay, project communication management. Let's do this. Okay. And when you think about it, it makes sense. I mean, what are you doing during most of your project? Meeting with people, sending them status updates, trying to get information, collect information, all that stuff is communicating. Every time you have a staff meeting, every time you speak with somebody, you email them, you put together a slide presentation, you're communicating. So it makes perfect sense. Which also explains why a big portion of project failure can be directed back to lack of proper communication. Yeah, it may manifest itself almost like a cancer. Yeah, it might metastasize and go to other parts of your project. But when you really strip the layers of the onion back, you find out that more times than not, it originated in your communications, your lack of proper communications. For example, like you failed to, speak with a stakeholder, you failed to keep someone abreast of what's going on, or you failed to send out timely information, or you just, did not get clarification on something which you should have, and so you move forward on a project that you didn't really have the information which you needed. So a number of different reasons why this is the root cause, but think about it. If you spend upwards of 90% of your time doing this, probably a good chance that a lot of your problems are going to originate here as well. Because we're human beings, and human beings, have emotions and all types of other things, and jealousy, and they want your job, and you want their job, and all types of things. So a lot of opportunity for things to get messed up here. So that's why, I tell folks, even though it's not a terribly challenging knowledge area, it is one of which you want to pay attention on. Okay, the focus of the project manager is to understand and plan an effective approach of communication within and outside the project team, and then to implement the same throughout the project life cycle or whatnot. So as we stated previously or whatnot, take a wild guess. I mean, I know you can see, but take a wild guess what one of the major outputs of this process is. Take a wild guess. Yeah, it's the communication management plan. I mean, if the process, I mean, you could put whatever you want here, okay? You could put HR here, you could put cost, time, integration, whatever. Well, except integration, because integration management doesn't have its own plan, or not one named after it. But for all the other ones, the output of this process is always going to be the management plan, always. So keep that in mind, okay? So like I've been telling you all along or whatnot, you don't need to memorize these, but you need to become familiar enough with them that you understand how the inputs flow through the tools and techniques in order to get the outputs. Okay, so what I've been encouraging you to do is ask yourself why. Why would these inputs be here, Ask yourself that. Look at each one of them. Also understand where you are on the map. So in this process here, where are you on the map? The framework, page 61. Drop it in the chat box if you know where we are. Drop it in the chat box. Cool. Question was, where are we on the map in regards to page 61? So when we're talking about this process here, plan communication management, where are we on the map? You're partly right, Jason. You're partly right, Ramesh. You're actually at the intersection of the planning process group and the communications management knowledge area. So you're at the intersection. It's like, I don't know what city you guys live in, but let me pick a big city, like New York City, okay? You just say like you're on Broadway. I mean, that's really not going to help anybody, right? Because I mean, that's a pretty long street, and there's a lot of stuff going on Broadway, right? But if you say, I mean, you're at the intersection, and I haven't been in New York since last year. Let me just, I can't even think now. I just had a brain freeze there on that. Let's just say Broadway, and I'm just going to make something up. Madison, which might not even intersect. Let's just say, for example, Broadway and Madison, okay? That's more specific, and it'll let somebody know specifically where you are. Now, obviously, when they get there, like, they got to look for you, but that's a lot cleaner than just say, hey, I'm on Broadway or I'm on Madison. Give me an intersection, okay? And so when I'm asking you where you are, I'm asking specifically for an intersection, okay? Cool, gotcha. All right, so in this case here we have project management plan. Something else I want to say before I move further here is this. This knowledge area is fairly short now because they stripped out a lot of the information from it and put it into stakeholder management. So before the 5th edition, there was no stakeholder management knowledge area. Everything was in communications management. But they stripped out a lot of stuff and put it in another knowledge area, so they sort of, this knowledge area doesn't have as much information in it. Okay, with that being said, we have the project management plan as an input, which should be kind of obvious. I've been stating this all along. It's a work in progress document. So as we get outputs from previous processes or processes that are happening in parallel, that information would go into the project management plan. Stakeholder register sort of makes sense. If you don't know the stakeholders involved, how are you going to plan? How are you going to communicate with them? Got your enterprise environmental factors, which show up quite a bit, along with your OPAs. They also show up quite a bit. Your tools and techniques include your communication requirement analysis, your communication technology, communication models, communication methods, meetings, which shows up quite a bit. You don't see expert judgment here, right? Again, do you remember when I said yesterday about looking at, patterns, and when something doesn't fit a pattern, ask yourself why? So, you don't see expert judgment, which is typically, it's typically a tool or technique, or what you would see in planning. So me, I look at patterns. When I see something doesn't fit a pattern, I take note, and that's what I've been saying all along. It will probably be easier for you to ask yourself which processes don't use OPAs and EEFs, and which ones don't use expert judgment, meetings, rather than figuring out which ones do, because they show up so often. And they could ask you a question on the exam: which of the following processes use expert judgment as a tool or technique? A, B, C, D. So you don't necessarily need to memorize it, because this is not a fill-in-the-blank exam. It's a multiple choice exam. So a multiple choice exam, unlike a fill-in-the-blank exam, does not require, a lot of memorization. If this was a fill-in-the-blank exam, obviously it would require a whole lot more memorization. You just have to be able to pick the best answer out of the given answers. Okay? Let's talk about this here. And as you might expect, like the output here, like we already talked about that, and the updates to the project documents. Okay, so what's happening here? This is the process of determining the project stakeholder information needs and defining a communication approach. The output of this process is the communications management plan, and it helps the project manager to document the approach to communicate most efficiently and effectively with stakeholders. Okay. All right. So you get different dimensions of communication, and this is one reason why it's so challenging for some people to really wrap their arms around this sometimes. And I'm talking about mainly in a real life situation. You got some people who are good technically, and this is the challenge with promoting somebody who might be a good technical person into a project management role. They might lack a lot of these things. And yes, you can train people to a certain extent and get them over the hump, but if a person is not willing to raise their level of communication to that next stage, they might not make the best project manager or manager, period. And this is why, okay? So for example, you 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 have to be adept at internal versus external communications, formal versus informal, vertical versus horizontal, official versus unofficial, written and oral, verbal and nonverbal. And throw on top of that all the politics and everything else, and you got yourself a real life situation here. And that's what I mean here. A lot of technical folks are very straightforward and very good at their technical work, which like they do analyzing and programming and so on and so forth. But this brings in all that ad hoc stuff, that soft stuff, that stuff that I can't really wrap my arms around. I got to just sort of, it's like feeling my way through the dark. Okay. Communications requirement analysis is the process to determine the information needs of stakeholders. You got the project management. The project manager should consider the number of potential communication channels or paths as an indicator of the complexity of the project's communications. And we're going to talk about this. This is actually another formula which you need to memorize. We'll talk about this one here in a second. And the information used for this purpose are things like organization charts, stakeholder register, logistics information, such as how many people will be involved with the project and at which locations. So I want to talk a little bit about the communication channels. All right. So you're in a situation on your project like where you got, stakeholders coming and going, like numbers on your project, and the overall stakeholders, are growing and then going down. So maybe you start off with 10 people leave for join, and other stakeholders outside. More things you have to be aware of and miss a stakeholder. Okay? So I'm going to read this first paragraph of what you see in front of you here. Project managers should also consider the number of potential communication channels or paths as an indicator of the complexity of a project's communications. The total number of potential communication channels is n times n minus 1 divided by 2, where n represents the number of stakeholders. So I need you to actually write that formula down in your notes. N, which represents the number of stakeholders, and then you put that into the formula, n times n minus 1 divided by 2. So here's an example here. For example, we have a project with 10 stakeholders. How many potential communication channels are there? We just drop that 10 in place of the n. So you got 10 times 9 divided by 2. So that's 90 divided by 2, which is 45. So 45 potential communication channels exist. So as a result, A key component of planning the project's annual communications is to determine and limit who will communicate with whom and who will receive what information. So you constantly, like I said, people coming and going, different people want different information. You got to stay abreast of all this stuff. Okay, here's what I need you to understand. They could potentially a couple different ways. The first way is you always have to be cognizant of how they're asking the question or how they're displaying the information, because it could dictate how you answer the question. And for example, you always have to make sure that the project manager is including him or herself in the total number of stakeholders. You always have to make sure that the project manager is including themselves in the overall number of stakeholders. Because if not, you're going to get the wrong answer. So here's a couple of examples. One way they may state it is a project manager has identified 5 stakeholders on her project. That would mean that if she has identified 5 stakeholders, then that means there are 5 stakeholders, because we can assume that she included herself. But if the question says something like a project manager and 5 stakeholders are on a project, then that means that the project manager is not included in the stakeholders, and you have to add them to it. So it's 6 total stakeholders. Very subtle, but that could be the difference between you getting the question right or getting it wrong. And they will put both answers on there if you calculate it with 5 or if you calculate it with 6. Just keep that in mind, okay? The other way that they could potentially try to mess you up is by just doing a bunch of math. So for example, like they'll say that, hey, like you started off with 15 stakeholders, 2 leave, 8 join. How many new communication channels do you have? So in order to get that right, it will require you to determine the total number of stakeholders, figure out how many channels are there originally, add and subtract like the number of stakeholders, do another math calculation to figure out how many stakeholders are currently on, on your project, and then subtract the difference. So again, if you don't do your math right, or if you have a hard time separating everything out, then like they could try to trip you up like that. Are we clear on that? Do I need to reiterate that at all? Let me know in the chat box, because I need you to understand that. Cool. Okay. So like most other things that we talked about, particularly math-based, you get a math-based question by a couple of different things. Number one is you need to know the formula. Kind of hard to get a math-based question right outside of guessing if you don't know what the formula is. That's a recipe for disaster. But it's not just good enough to have the formula. You actually need to know how to use the formula. Oh yeah, how many times we had a formula and didn't know how to use it? That stinks. Okay, so you got the formula, you know how to use it. Then you actually need to be able to pull the information out of the question. So essentially, know what they're asking you and be able to pull the information that you need out of the question. Which that's why some people are good at math, but they struggle in word problems. Because if you just gave them the information, they could easily plug and play and interpret, but they have a hard time pulling information out of a word problem. You become good at math-based questions by practicing. If you don't practice, you won't get good, or even if you're good, like you'll end up being a little bit rusty, and you don't want that, okay? They can also throw some algebra at you. I haven't seen too much of that on the exam, but they could potentially give you the number of channels and make you solve for one of the missing variables. So anything pretty much is fair game in these things. So fairly simple formula, but how they ask it could make it somewhat confusing. So just keep that in mind. Let's talk about communication methods here. Actually, I want to tell you guys about something else while it's on my mind. Not that I wouldn't tell you later, but I think this is a good time to tell you about it real quickly. All right. So you got different ways of communicating. So you have formal, written, you have informal, written, you have formal, verbal, and you may want to be taking notes on this, and informal, verbal. All right. So why is this important? Okay, pretty standard or whatnot. These are four different ways in which you can communicate. Yeah, exactly. So you have formal written. Formal written, easy way to keep this in your head is, anything that you pretty much got to put your signature on is going to be formal. Any CYA documents, um, anything of that nature is going to be formal. Contracts, proposals, things of that nature, okay? Informal is for anything notice of some sort or whatnot, that would be push. I'm pushing it out there. Email marketing. I'm pushing it out there, and you can read it. Or you get it like when I want you to get it, as opposed to pull communication, which you post it out there in a database of some sort, and people can go and watch and look at it, at their own their own pace. Sort of how the LMS is, sort of how the YouTube videos are and stuff. You can go and access those whenever you feel like it. If you want to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're restless and can't sleep, guess what? The LMS is there waiting for you. You do have a friend, no matter where you are, and it's the LMS. I'm joking, okay? But seriously, I mean, if you do have a sleepless night and you need to go to sleep, I found this, whenever I get folks are talking about, I need all these different drugs in order to sleep. No, you don't need drugs. All you need to do is sit up and read PMBOK at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I guarantee you, you will have the best night's sleep you've ever had. Trust me. You will probably drool all over the papers or whatnot. Okay? So, I always laugh when I see those commercials, because obviously they've never read PMBOK late at night, which probably hurts comprehension as well. But I say all that to say is that pull puts it out there and lets the recipient pull it down at their convenience off of, say, Dropbox or Google Drive or Apple iCloud or wherever it might be stored, okay? So those are your communication methods. You will need to know those for the exam, so just keep that in mind. Let's talk a little bit about the communication models, okay? Let's talk about this. All right, so I'm a visual learner and everything. Do you guys know what kind of learner you are? Drop it in the chat box. You're a visual learner, meaning like you learn by seeing stuff, and are you auditory, like listening and like to listen to tapes and see, well, I said tapes, man, wow. It's like it's the 1990s or something, right? With CDs or MP3s, it's like you're driving or whatnot, or you kinesthetic, and that's like cooks and bakers and carpenters and folks who like to work with their hands. Learn, not just like to, they actually learn by actually doing, Okay. Visual and hands-on and visual learning. Yeah, I find in most of my classes, most people tend to be more visual than everything else. Most of us are some mixture, but we tend to favor one learning style over the other. Obviously, for example, time management, you could be a visual learner all day long. You actually got to pull out the paper and pull out the pencil and actually try it, because, visual just won't cut it. And I'm a visual learner too, so so some stuff like you need to get your hands involved. I actually found, and this is like a good little study tip here, a way to help you guys is, I'm a visual learner to a certain extent, but I found that when I was reading the PMBOK, I actually took notes while I read. It sounds like a waste of time and everything, but I actually found value because the act of me actually putting pencil to paper helped solidify it in my mind. I can't explain it scientifically or anything, but I can just say that worked for me. I've spoken with a number of other students. That's tended to work for them as well. So even if you're not necessarily a kinesthetic learner, the act of you physically putting pencil to paper might actually help you. Like if you guys found that to be true in your past life or whatnot, like when you were in school or, at your job or, like whenever you're taking a class, if you found that to be helpful to actually take notes. And I'm not just talking about taking class notes. I'm talking about when I actually read the PMBOK, I took notes on the stuff I read. So essentially what I did is I read the PMBOK extremely thoroughly. I took notes, and rather than having to go back and review the PMBOK when it was all said and done, I went back and reviewed my notes because I took such thorough notes. Now that's how I got through college too, like big time. So You know, is that something you guys find helpful as far as, is that something like you've done in the past? And if so, is that something which you found helpful? You can feel free to oh, maybe you have. Oh. Okay, yeah. So yes, you do note cards, Jason. Okay, cool. Yeah, so I mean, folks do, yeah, like a lot of visual learners buy flashcards, or they create flashcards. There's iPhone apps that have flashcards, and there's, apps on, the Google Play and all that, and obviously we have flashcards in the LMS, ton of flashcards. I think it's like 500 or 600 plus flashcards on there. So you have flashcards are really good for helping you learn definitions and formulas. Like to put on a flashcard or whatever, and you can really get pretty good at that. I personally didn't use a lot of flashcards. I mean, I had a few, but I've actually had folks in class like who created their own flashcards from scratch. Again, it may seem like it's a little time consuming, but my thoughts around this, okay, and you can do what you do with it, but I was going to take this exam one time only. I already had in my mind I was a PMP, and I I just had in my mind I was going to do whatever it took within ethical means to pass this exam on the first attempt. And although I didn't write out my own flashcards, I did a bunch of other stuff and a bunch of other study. I spent upwards of 100 hours study, which is a good round number and one that I commonly suggest students study towards. Because everybody's asking, how do I know I'm ready? Well, 100 hours isn't a hard and fast number, but here's how you know you're ready. When you're scoring at or around 90% on your practice exams. I know, you're going to hear a bunch of different people say different numbers. Oh, if you study, 60 hours, or you study 40 hours, or, if you get 75 or 80 on the practice exams. I get that too. I hear you. But 90% is where you ought to be, not because you actually need to score 90% in order to pass exam, but because 90% means you have a fairly good grasp of the information, and you're going to have the confidence of a young lion. I mean, like if you've ever watched these shows, in Animal Kingdom and stuff, and you like these young dogs and young elephants. I mean, look at the confidence like they have. Because when you know your stuff, and you know that there's almost nothing they could throw at you like you haven't seen or practiced, I mean, that's the kind of confidence you can't buy. That's kind of confidence that only comes from knowing. So anyway, that's why I advise that. So Jason, I usually write my notes on note cards so I can take them with me anywhere. Absolutely, I think that's a good approach. Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping you guys know like how you study and learn best, but I do get a number of folks in class like who haven't been in school in years, if not decades. Um, are you guys able to see my screen right now? No, you can see the screen. Say yes. Can you see the screen? Okay, cool. One second here. I got a message here. Hold on a second. Okay, cool. All right, so back to our regularly scheduled program here. Um, the communication model. So I was saying all that to say that I'm a visual learner and I like to draw stuff out. So look at this here. Okay. So on this side you have the sender, And on this side, you got the receiver. And this here is your medium, okay? Meaning, what are you sending your message over? And let's just say that we're having a phone conversation. So our medium like will be the telephone line. If it's a landline, which a lot of people don't have a landline anymore, but if it's a landline, it would be obviously over the landline. If it's over a cell phone, it would be over the air or whatnot, over the wireless network. And so what happens is the sender will send a message over that medium. Okay? We'll send a message over that medium. And the sender will okay. The sender will then encode that message. I know this is like kind of drawing it kind of up here. They'll encode the message, and then the receiver will then decode that message. And then the receiver will then encode a message, or what they'll do is they'll actually encode feedback. So if they're the recipient, it's called a message. If they are the sender, then they are delivering feedback. So in this case, like the receiver encodes feedback and sends it back to the sender, who then decodes that message. Okay. So this might happen on a continual basis or whatnot, and maybe hundreds, if not thousands of times on a telephone call. Okay. I drew this here because this represents noise. Okay. What's noise? Noise is anything that that impedes the receiver of the message understanding your message the way you intended for them to understand it. So maybe they got your message, but for whatever reason they don't understand it or don't comprehend. So for example, different things can be noise. So it could be things like cultural differences, language, it could be culture, it could be education level, it could be experience. All these things essentially distort the message so that the person who's receiving it doesn't understand it. So you said it one way, or you understood it one way and you related in a certain way, but the person on the other end did not comprehend it the way you expected them to. So for example, if you're a seasoned project manager talking to a junior PM, like who's only been out of school 2 or 3 years, their understanding of project management probably won't be as thorough as yours. If you're a PMP speaking to a non-PMP, they may not understand some of the language which you use if they have not studied for the PMP. They aren't going to know what the heck an activity is, because most people don't use activity if they're not like a PMP. They're going to say tasks or whatnot. Well, PMI doesn't use the word tasks. Task has no meaning in the PMI world. Okay? So all these things impede understanding, and that's noise, okay? So just keep that in mind. So I got a question for you future PMPs here. I want you to drop. I want you to think about this, and I want you to drop your answer in the chat box. Whose responsibility is it to make sure the message was both received and understood? Whose responsibility is it to make sure that the message was both received and understood? Drop your answer in the chat box if you might. You can feel free to drop your answer in the chat box at any time. You can drop your answer in the chat box. I don't see any answers in the chat box. Okay, I see your answers. Okay. I don't know why I'm not getting these. Okay. Person responsible for ensuring that the message was both received and understood. You stepped away. How could you do that? Yeah, it's you know, what I asked is who's responsible for making sure that the message was both received and understood? I'm like, you could miss 1 minute of what I said? I'm shocked. All right, what's your answer? Whose responsibility is it? What's your answer? Drop it in the chat box if you don't mind. Let me be more specific. Whose responsibility is it to ensure the message was both received and understood? Is it the sender's responsibility or is it the receiver's? Is it the sender or is it the receiver? Okay, we're getting some answers in here. Good stuff. Your volume is acting up. Okay. Naresh, I haven't opened your line, so I'm going to open your line and get your thoughts on why you said sender, okay? So here I come. Make sure you guys are awake over there. Okay. Naresh?
Yeah,
Okay.
the sender should know the audience well, the culture, uh, the system, the communication path that works for them. So the sender who is communicating information to the stakeholders should be more specific, accurate, both audience perspective and cultural perspective.
Okay. Yeah, I actually like you're right. It is the sender, you know, and here's why, okay? Because as a sender, we make sure that the receiver understood our message? Well, first of all, like we make sure that they received it and understood it by requesting feedback. And if you've ever dealt with an international team, people from different parts of the country and world, you'll find that asking for feedback goes a long way there. So you're right. Thanks a lot, Naresh. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So yes, it's the sender's responsibility. So if you got that, give yourself a pat on the back. So I drew this out in my own way, but that's essentially like what this is saying here, okay? Points to remember: we do not do any communications as part of the project communications management plan. This is true for all management plans. Like their roadmap documents, how-to documents, you don't actually do any work at this point. That's when you get into executing, okay? Some contents of the communication management plan include things such as the following and whatnot, which there's a whole lot more listed. I mean, this is just a sampling. There's a more comprehensive listing on page 296 in your PMP. Okay, next up is managed communications. What process group do you think this is in? Drop it in the chat box. What process group do you think managed communications is in? Of course, if you haven't memorized, you don't have to guess, right? But if you don't, go ahead and take a stab at it. Let me know what you think. You don't have to look at page 61. Don't be, I see you. Don't look at page 61. What the process group is it going to be in? Drop it in the chat box. Man, you guys are on it. Yay. Jason, I like what you're saying, but I asked for the process group. So I didn't ask like where it is. I'm asking for the process group. But I like your initiation there. So as far as giving me more than what I asked for. But yeah. So if I specifically ask what knowledge area it's in, then this would be in communications management. If I ask what process group, then it would be in communications. It would be in planning process. It would be an executing process group. Is there not a process group I didn't mention there? Yeah, it's in the executing process group. And if I ask where is it on the map, that's when you give me the intersection. Cool. So you guys got it right. Cool. I got you, Jason. All right, cool. All right, so in this case here, we're in executing. So guess what you might need if you're in executing? Did I hear a plan? Yeah, you need to have the plan. You need to know what you're executing against. Well, guess what you're executing against in communications management? The communication management plan, absolutely. Okay. You got your work performance reports or whatnot, which is going to neatly display the information that comes out of your executing group or whatnot. And again, a lot of this stuff is iterative, meaning that happens over and over again. So it's not like you just communicate once and stop. No, it's an ongoing cycle. And then we have our enterprise and environmental factors, which shows up quite a bit, and then our OPAs. We have our tools and techniques. We roll the inputs through the tools and techniques. They include the communication technology, communication models, communication methods, which we talked about in the previous process, the information management system, and the performance reporting. We do all that to get our outputs, which in this case include the project communications, the project document updates, the project management plan updates, and then the OPA updates. So sender-receiver models here, include feedback loops and removing barriers such as noise, choice of media. So decide when to communicate in written versus verbally, and when to use an informal memo versus a formal letter, which I talked about earlier. Writing style, usage of active versus passive voice, structure of sentencing. It's not an exact science. It's one of those things that you just have to sort of become good at and observe. Also, this changes from culture to culture. In North America, like, we tend to be more assertive overall. Of course, like there's differences in the South versus up north. Huge differences between the West Coast and the East Coast, especially New York City and all up in that the New England area. But for the most part, Americans versus some other parts of the world, particularly some parts of Asia and certain other countries, like, we're a lot more upfront, speak our mind or whatnot. But if you're dealing with the international team, or especially if you're working in another country, you may have to adapt this to a certain extent to fit the environment in which you're in, or otherwise, like, you risk offending people possibly. Meeting management, so this includes things like preparing agendas and dealing with conflicts. Presentation techniques such as body language and design of aids. Facilitation techniques, building consensus and overcoming obstacles. Then listening techniques, active listening and removal of barriers. Active listening. Do you know what active listening is? Here's what active listening isn't. Like, you're basically waiting for the other person to take a breath, and then you want to jump in and start talking or talking over somebody. That would not be active listening. Active listening is basically sitting there listening, comprehending what the other person's saying, digesting it, and then, and only then, when it makes sense, responding back at that time. But if you're just basically waiting until the other person takes a breath in order to cut in and sit and say what you want to say, then you haven't exercised good active listening skills. Also, something else I like to state that we know that upwards of 90% of our time is spent communicating, but do you also know that a good portion of our communications is nonverbal? Yeah, it's not what comes out of your mouth. It's nonverbal. Yep, it's how you walk. It's how, just take a look at people who have presence. And notice that a lot of people, like, who have a lot of presence, don't do a lot of talking. But their body language, the whole persona, it basically speaks for them. And so just be cognizant of yourself and what you do and, like, how you carry yourself, because it could very well be indicative of a lot of different things. All right, so nothing terribly complicated about that knowledge, that process or whatnot. Okay, we're in control communications. Take a wild guess what process group that's in. Yeah, it's in monitor and control. Absolutely. Yep. You guys are on it tonight. You don't even need me. You guys are on. What is going on with my mouse? Can't even touch it. Okay. Yes. Okay. So we're at the intersection. Okay, so we know we're in monitor and control, and we're at the intersection of monitor and control and communications management. Whenever we're in monitor and control, what are we doing? We are verifying or validating that we did what we said we were going to do, how we said we were going to do it, when we said we would do it by. And where there are differences, we are looking to rectify them. That's what's happening anytime we're in a monitor and control process. So this is a monitor and control process. We're doing the same thing. So in order to do that, you need to have a couple of things at minimum. You need to have the plan in which you were executing against, and you need to know what you actually delivered. Because how are you going to rectify something if you don't know what you did? So exactly. So the plan would be the project management plan. Why is it the project management plan and not the communications management plan? I'm glad you asked. Thank you. It's not the communications management plan because the project management plan has been finalized. By the time you start executing, your project management plan has been finalized. So we no longer say we're going back to the communications management plan. We're going back to the project management plan because the communications plan is a subsidiary plan that once it's finalized and authorized, it becomes a part of the overall communications management plan. Okay? Just something good to keep in mind. As you start to learn these things, it becomes so much simpler. You know, you don't have to memorize this. Like when you know some basic rules, like the one I just told you, makes this stuff so much easier. Like it just becomes logical at some point. I'm in monitor control. I'm going to be looking at my plan. I'm not going to be looking at my subsidiary plans because the overall project management plan has been finalized. Wow. So that eliminates all of those sub-plans as possible answer choices. Got our project communications. We have our issue log because, you know, we need to be aware of issues. And what's the difference between an issue and a risk? If you know the answer, drop it in the chat box. What's the difference between an issue and a risk? Drop your answer in the chat box if you don't mind. What's the difference? Risk is losses. Don't know about that one, Jason, but I appreciate your effort. All right. The difference between a risk and an issue is that an issue has already occurred and a risk might occur. An issue has already occurred, whereas a risk might occur. Okay, so basically it means the issue must be addressed, whereas a risk, you know, we don't necessarily have to address it, but depending on what kind of risk it is, like we may want to get a head start on it. And we'll talk about that more in risk management starting tomorrow. We also have our work performance data, which is the output of the executing process group. So we have our plan, what we were executing against, and we have what we actually did, which is the work performance data. And then we have the OPAs, okay? We roll them through the tools and techniques, which include our information management system, expert judgment, which shows up a lot. Expert judgment is back. And then meetings, which also shows up a lot. We get our outputs here, which include the work performance information, which is your synthesized data. Got change requests. We have our project management plan updates, our project document updates, and then the OPA updates. All right. So work performance data includes things like deliverable status, schedule progress, costs, or whatnot. So the main thing, like I've been stating about work performance data, is that you can't make business decisions off of the raw data. You got to synthesize it or do something with it in order to be able to make decisions with it. Performance measurements data is generated from work performance data, which compares the actual progress to the plan progress. So it includes the comparisons of things like actual to plan schedule performance, actual to plan cost performance, and actual to plan technical performance. I explain in real simple terms. I mean, work performance information, is the synthesized work performance data. So you can make decisions based off of work performance information. Okay, and here's some examples of the types of work performance information which you might be using. And then you can put it, also another one, another output includes your performance reports. That actually is not, like, that's a way that you can display the information. Okay, so the performance reports is a way that you can display the information. Let's look again at the calculation, of which I gave you the calculation earlier. We talked about it. Let's look at it again, okay? So we talked about this example. Actually, comes straight out of the PIM box. So I'm not going to mention this one again, but these steps are, number one, know the formula. Step number two is enter the values, and then step number three, get your answer. Just keep in mind, like, the two pieces of advice I gave you, and the first one being that you want to make sure that you include yourself in that stakeholder number, but be careful how the question's worded. Then the other one is you may need to do several different calculations in order to come up with the final answer. So that's communications management. Before we get into the quiz, are there any questions? I mean, not a terribly difficult knowledge area, but there may be a couple things in there that may trip you up a little bit. But any questions? Got any questions? Drop them in the chat box. Before we take the quiz, I got a question. Naresh, did you get a chance to catch up and watch the video from I believe it was Monday's class? Have you had a chance yet? I believe Monday we talked about quality management, I think. Yeah. Cool. Okay, great. All right, so let's get into the quiz. See how you guys do. All right, so receivers in the communication model filter the information to all of the following except what's your best answer? And notice that word except. See that word except right there? Wow, cool. So let's see if you got it right. C, yes. So receivers filter information through cultural considerations, knowledge of the subject matter, language abilities, geographic location, emotions, and attitudes, but habits isn't necessarily one of them. Okay, a project manager is working with another company. He needs to share some confidential information. He wants to know the authorized person responsible to release this information. Which document should he refer to? Ooh, this is a good question here. Okay. You were on it tonight, Naresh. Man, the rise of Naresh. You must be drinking some of the same stuff Jason's drinking, because like he was on it like the last couple of nights, and now I mean, he's still on it actually. But I mean, like you're really stepping up now. I'm like, wow, good stuff. Okay, yeah, the answer choice is B. So a project communication management plan would capture the details of the person responsible to share confidential information outside the company. So, you may have consultants like you're working with or outside vendors or whatnot. So that's like why that might be important. So which of the following is not part of the communication management plan? Notice that word not. I know, it seems obvious, but people can skip over that there, and it changes the entire scope of this question. Okay. All right, let's see what the answer is. The answer is actually C. A project communication management plan would not capture the list of all the stakeholders. It is part of the stakeholder register, not the communication management plan. So yeah, that would be the output of the identify stakeholders process, and one of the key outputs is the stakeholder register. So they caught you guys slipping there on that one. Okay, what is the sequence of steps in a basic communication model? What's the basic steps here? What's your answer? Okay, Jason. The man, Jason. Naresh, what's your answer? I don't see that as an answer choice there. Naresh, I don't see that as an answer choice up here. Where are you getting that from? NM. NM. I am not following you, Naresh. Is the answer A, B, C, or D? Oh, gotcha. Okay. All right. So the answer, like you should have gotten, is D, as in dog. And here's why. Okay. The sequence of steps in basic communication models are encoded, transmit it over the medium. And so you encode it, you then transmit it over the medium. The receiver will then decode it, they'll acknowledge it, they'll provide feedback and or response. That's coming from page 293 in the PMP. So we got time this evening to go through a few of the flashcards, so let's see how good you guys are here. So put your answer in the chat box. A systematic procedure, technique, or process used to transfer information among project stakeholders. What's your best answer? What's your basic answer? Or your best answer, I should say. Okay, cool. Jason. Let's see which one got it right here. Communication methods. Yep, communication methods. That would be the right answer. And if you call the communication methods included the interactive communication, push communication, and pull communication. Overthinking, yeah, I got you. Yep, happens to the best of us. Okay, maybe you do better this time. So restrictions on the content, timing, audience, or individual who will deliver a communication, usually stemming from specific legislation or regulation, technology, or organizational policies. What is that? Man, I should do Who Wants to Be Like a Millionaire PMP. Let you call Lifeline. That would be a short-lived game show. I can't win anything in these games. All right, what's your answer? Drop it in the chat box. What's your answer? Drop it in the chat box. No clue on this one, huh? I hear you. I hear you. Would you be able to get it right on a multiple choice exam though? Have you been keeping up like with your reading in the PMBOK as well? Like for example, we're on communications management. Have you at least read through communication management in your PMBOK? Or are you still stuck on chapter 3? All right, what's the answer here? Communication constraints. See how this is a pretty easy knowledge area, but it could still be, even though it appears easy and it is relatively easy, they could throw a bunch of definition questions at you. Okay, here's another one. A description, analogy, or schematic used to represent how the communication process will be performed for the project. What's your answer? Yeah, you thought you knew communications management, until you took this class. You're like, what in the world? I got you. I got you. Got to pick up the pace, my friend. Holiday's over. Got to get you in PMP shape. It's like, if you ever played a sport, like ran track or baseball or football or something, you know how it is, like when you're coming up on a big track meet or like a big football game, you got to get in shape, man. You got to do the extra drills. You got to run up and down. You got to tell your friends or whatever, hey, I got to hang out after I get this PMP. I mean, honest to goodness, I wasn't quite a hermit, but maybe there's a step or two like above a hermit, but I pretty much locked myself down. I mean, like I told you, this was going to be one shot, one kill. There was going to be no second time around. This was it, okay? I put blood, sweat, and tears into it, and that was it, okay? I would have been so disappointed if I didn't get it, because I had to put in a lot of effort, okay? But anyway, I say all that to say that you got to take your game to the next level. This is your Michael Jordan moment. This is your whatever athlete like you admire. This is your moment here. Okay? You don't use like your physical body now. You use your mental capabilities. Work performance data and the rest. Okay, cool. All right. Yep, it's a lot of information. I got you. Yep. Like drinking water through a fire hose. Answer is communication models. Remember, the model was the the sender, receiver, message over the medium, encode, decode, send feedback. Okay. Specific tools, systems, computer programs, etc., used to transfer information among project stakeholders. Gotta get this one right. You know, like they can't give it to you any easier. What's your answer? Okay. All right, let's see what you get here. Okay, the answer is communication technology. Jason, man, you are on it. Virtual fist bump, okay? Good job. Okay. So that is communications management. Any questions? Shouldn't be too much stuff there to trip you up, but you know, definitely encourage you to read that knowledge here, okay? Yeah, I got you. Just have to study it. All right, let's take this quick poll like we do every time, and then we'll see if there's any other questions, and then we'll wrap it up. Please go ahead and answer the poll. Cool, thanks a lot. All right, so we're finished with the session tonight. How do you guys feel right now? I mean, like, this is just me asking you informally, you know, how do you guys feel? You feel like you're getting this stuff? You know, is it like drinking water through a fire hose? You know, you're starting to formulate it in your mind, like how you're going to go about studying. Like, you know, have you? Well, first of all, like before we even get like that far, have you guys started on your PMI application yet? Say yes or no in the chat box if you don't mind. Have you started on your PMI application yet? Because all this stuff doesn't mean a hill of beans, you know, if you don't get the application in. Well, let me clarify. Back up. You're not going to actually send the application in yet because you obviously don't have the hours yet of classroom training. But that does not stop you from starting on your application and saving it, you know, and just wait until you have your hours and stuff in order to go ahead and press send. Okay, I'm getting it. I am being methodical in my study. I have started. It's in the, I started, it's a pain. I got you. Oh, haven't started on it. Okay. Yeah, I know, it's a pain in the you know what, but we all got to go through it. Trust me, I've been there. I had the a lot of you know short sleep nights. How about that? A lot of short sleep nights and stuff like that. Do they actually call the companies? Okay, great question, Jason. So Jason asked, do they actually call the companies or agencies? And I'm assuming, like you mean by they, PMI. they don't call them unless you get audited. And then they will call or they will send them a package and stuff like that. So definitely would make sure like you put down references who would be, you know, like who like you a lot and don't want to hurt you. How about that? If you have a manager, you know, whom you are questionable about, you aren't sure if they're going to give you a favorable recommendation or vouch for what you say, then you may not want to put them down as a reference. Treat this like you're applying to the world's greatest job, and you would not put down a reference of who you were not 110% sure that they were going to A, give you a good reference, and B, corroborate what you said you did. If you said like you worked for, you know, 200 hours on this project, you want them to say, yes, Jason worked 200 hours on this project. What you don't want them to say, oh, I think Jason only worked 165 hours on it. That would be a fail, you know? So it would be helpful to just pick up the phone, call up, and make sure like you're still on their A list and that their memories matches your memory. So Jason has another question. What if you, I'm assuming that's what if your projects are through the same agencies and most of the same contact person or department? Not the same reference as many times as you need to. But what I will say is that they don't let your projects, like they don't allow you to overlap projects. And so let's just say it's January through December. And during the months of January through March, you worked on 3 projects at the same time. Well, you can include that time frame for 3 different projects. You can only include like that time frame for one project over the time frame. Like they don't let you overlap. Yeah. So keep that in mind. Cool. Other questions? Other questions before we wrap this thing up? Definitely encourage you to at least get started on your application. If you're an organized person, it shouldn't take you too long. I've seen folks get the application done in as little as 4 hours or so. I've seen some people take, you know, weeks and months. Just depends on how organized like you are and if you burn the bridges like when you leave. Like some people, like when they leave a job, they leave a job. I mean, the place is on fire, like the roof is burning down. I mean, folks are jumping out of windows. They leave that place burning in flames. You know, hopefully that's nobody in this class, you know, it leaves their job like that. But that can make it very difficult for you to get a reference, because if you're the guy like who burnt down the building, I mean, I don't mean literally, I mean figuratively, you know, people might not want to give you a good reference. Great, you got good references, Jason. Great. I suspected that. I suspect if you're, you know, if you're on this webinar, you probably take your career seriously and you try to avoid doing things that could torpedo it, like burning down bridges. All right, cool. So we're at 9 o'clock on the dot. So you know, it's been great. Another great session. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to having you guys back here tomorrow night where we'll talk about risk management. Okay. So thanks a lot, guys. Cool. Thanks a lot. Have a good evening.